Hi, my name is Lauren Dentler, and I am going to be presenting a writing a research paper presentation today. This is based on the practices and offerings at the University of North Texas, so I'll be including some of our library resources as well. And yeah, let's get into it. All right, so in order to start the process of researching, we have to understand and get a little bit of an overview about what the process is. So first we need to identify a topic or question. So this is the whole purpose of a research paper, right? We are answering a question. We're learning more about something we didn't know before, and we are asking a new question. And then this next step that we have to do is we have to go through and we are reviewing the literature. So this is where we go through, we analyze sources, we analyze what we're looking at, and we talk about what we want to know more of, what we need to be researching. This is where we look at what people have talked about before us on this topic. And then we ask a question again. So this is a different question than before. It might be similar, but it might be something that now we are turning into a thesis statement. So we are asking a question about our topic no one has asked yet, which is why we are researching and why we are having to choose a methodology after that. So choosing a methodology is what helps us test our question that came before. And so I'll be talking about each of these things in more detail. But once we have a methodology, we collect data, and then we analyze that data, and then we go on to do the best part, which is write our paper. And I will give you guys a few resources for how you can do that. There are plenty of resources at UNT, many of which I've used myself, and they are wonderful options to start with. All right, so where do I start? We start by identifying the problem. So we identify a topic that we want to write about. This can be done a number of ways. We may have an assigned topic. So some professors like to give us an assigned topic that we can talk about, and they know right off the bat, here's what I want your research paper to be on. There are other professors that ask you to come up with your question. And so since we are in the science department, you may be coming up with your own idea or question. And so you can generate that idea from questions that you have had throughout the year. This is when I like to turn to my notes and usually go through, do a deeper dive, and go, what are things that I have questions about? What are things I still want to know more on? What is a question that no one has asked that I really want an answer to? We can research through our semester materials. We can research through other classes that are relevant to this topic that we have today. But this is where you come up with, hey, I want to know more about this thing. The reason we do that in this capacity is because when you write a research paper, it takes a while, and you want to be interested and you want to have a good idea. And that little seed of interest can keep you going and motivated when sometimes it can get a little bit difficult. And the next thing is to read. This is actually a piece of advice that was given to me last year when I was working on one of my academic papers. The thing I love about this is because you are engaging with more materials and you're engaging with different ideas. And the more you read about something, the more curious you get about something. And so especially if you have that little seed of something that you're interested in and you start reading, you learn more, and you learn other questions you want to ask, and you learn more about the topic, and you start diving in deeper, which is the whole point of a research paper. It's to dive in and to really gain a comprehensive understanding of a topic. And another way that we can do this is looking at LibGuides. So LibGuides are sometimes a way that we can play around or look at information, look at what our class has presented. So it's a way that we can get access to information to learn more. And I come from a theater background, not a science background. And a lot of times I would look at our LibGuides that we had at my school, at Iowa State, and I would look for different places I could go watch plays or read different articles because I was interested in things that other people weren't necessarily interested in. So that was my way to do that. And then we review the literature. This is a very important step. So this is when we search for books, journal articles, and websites related to your topic. You can look at this a few different places. You can look at the UNT Library Catalog. You can look at JSTOR. You can look at reference materials. This is things like encyclopedias, dictionaries, handbooks. I pulled from a handbook for one of my most recent papers that I wrote, and it was a really useful way to explore a little bit more and to give backgrounds, like historical backgrounds on a topic that I found really interesting. You can also look at trustworthy academic websites, which I'm going to talk about in just a little bit, give a little bit of a deeper dive. And you can also ask a librarian. We have a science librarian here at UNT that's specifically trained to help people in the science department gain access to resources, and she is an expert on anything you ask her. I promise. She may not know the answer right off the bat, but she knows how to find the answer, which is really what librarians are all about. And that's part of the reason we enjoy this. That's why we do what we do. You can also search in the archives. This is a really fun aspect for me as an archivist myself. That's my specialization. If you are in need of any historical references, this can be material related to a professor that has passed away and donated his works and materials to the archive. If they were interested in the topic that you were talking about, you can go and search the archive. You can search their materials. You can search their notes. And while that might not be a peer reviewed, it can give you a little bit of background, and it can give you a little bit more information on someone who was an expert. You can understand their insight and maybe approach something from a new angle. And a hint, as someone who has written a lot of academic papers, as you research and as you look for sources, keep track of those sources. It is incredibly important. You can do this a couple different ways. One of the really popular ones is Zotero. The other one that's really popular, and it's the one that we actually provide access to here at UNT, it is RefWorks. I use RefWorks for all of my papers. It's really useful. It's a great resource. I highly recommend it. All right, and then this is the key to identifying a good source, or what we in education like to call the CRAP test. This is a kind of a silly name, but it is absolutely useful and relevant. So we have a few different ways that we look at it. So we have currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. So when we're talking about currency, we're talking about how recently was the source created. Is it from years and years and years ago? Because if it's from years and years ago in a science class, probably not the most appropriate source. Relevance. Does this information apply to your topic and your research paper? So does it answer your question? What is the audience for this source? Who is this source meant for? And is it you? Because if it's not the right source for you, then it might not be the source for your paper. And then, have you looked at a variety of sources, print and online? So have you looked at handbooks? Have you looked at encyclopedias? Have you looked at online articles and print articles? Have you looked at physical books? Have you looked at digital books? Where have you looked? And have you looked at government websites? What is the information that you are pulling these sources from? Authority. So authority is the one that you have probably heard many times before, because we need to talk about who published the source and is the author qualified to publish that source. So there are always scammy articles, there are scammy places. In high school, we learn don't use Wikipedia. It can be a great source for the beginning of your essay, but it's not a source you should ever be quoting in your essay, right? It can help us get ideas, but it's definitely not an academic source. We need to know who published the source, who contributed to the source, is the author qualified to publish, is it a website that is an authority on the subject, does the URL reveal anything about the source? This is typically a .gov and .edu that is more trustworthy than a .com or .net. There's authority is difficult, and if you need any help figuring out if something is an authority, contact a librarian. That's what we are specialized in. All right, and then accuracy. So where does the information come from? Is the source reliable? Is there appropriate evidence? Has information been edited or peer reviewed? This is a really big one, especially when we're talking about academic writing. We need to make sure that anything that has been written has been peer reviewed. We need to make sure that our source is testable. It is something that people have looked at and handled before. Because if they haven't, that is a big red flag as to something not being an appropriate source, and especially if we are talking about science, we need to make sure that our sources are appropriate. If there are a ton of spelling errors, probably not a reputable source. Purpose. So we need to establish what is the purpose behind this information. Is it to inform, to persuade, to convince us of something? If it's to inform, it could make it more reputable. If it's to convince or to persuade, it depends on the context, right? If it's an academic article, they may be trying to convince us of something. They have an argument to be made. If it's some random website, we don't really know that we can trust it. If it's social media, we don't know if we can trust it. So we need to know, is the author making their intentions clear? Is it factual or propaganda? Is it impartial? And are there any ideological concerns? All of those are things that we need to keep in mind when we are looking at a source. And so, if you don't know if a source is true, do the CRAP test. I promise it'll work out. All right, and then next you are asking a question and you are defining your thesis statement. So your thesis statement is incredibly important. It is the through line to your essay. So you've reviewed the literature, you know the question you want to ask, and now that question you're going to turn into a thesis statement. So your thesis statement is the main idea of your essay. It presents your argument for research. It controls the subject matter of your essay. So you should not be deviating at all, ever, from your thesis statement. If you are deviating too far, the paper is not going to make sense. It's not going to be a good paper. So you need to make sure that that is your way of staying on track throughout the entire thing. All right, and then methodology. So your methodology is how you collect your data. There are two different methodologies that are often used. There's a lot of others that are kind of out there, and then we kind of lump them in under different things. But this is kind of the overview. So we have quantitative and qualitative. So quantitative is what we typically use in science. It uses numbers, graphs, and data to test data or to test a hypothesis. This is things like sampling, experiments, surveys. So this is anything that requires numbers, that we have to do a big test or we have to be able to prove. It's something that typically someone else can replicate. It's something that someone else can go through and look and test themselves, and it makes sense. So this is when we're using experiments and we're using numbers, something that's easy to track, something we can put in a chart like the one above my head right now. We also have qualitative. So you're going to see this a little bit more in the humanities, but we do use qualitative more than you expect in a science paper. So qualitative is still used in like the literature review portion, and when we're talking about the historical background of a procedure or an experiment or an idea that we are currently discussing. So we do still use qualitative, and a lot of times what you're going to notice in methodology is that we have a little bit of mixed methodology. It depends on the subject you're studying and your topic, but sometimes we can be a little bit mixed and a little bit different, a little bit all over the place. Not a bad thing. So second to last, we collect and we analyze data. So collecting data means taking notes, conducting experiments, conducting surveys, conducting interviews, and examining your materials. This is when you get to be the scientist and you get to take the literature that you have reviewed and you have broken down and you have dig through and found all these little interesting parts, and now you actually do something with that data. You design your experiment, you conduct that experiment, you observe, and you participate in the actual experimental research itself. And then you analyze that data. So you go back, you look, and you ask, does that information you gathered answer your research question? If it's not, go back to the drawing board and you start the process again, or you talk about why this didn't work, what your theory is around why this wasn't successful. And then you write, and this is kind of the main part of it, right? So this is the main part. Now you write your paper. So we have a few different resources with which you can write your paper. We have the UNT Writing Center, which provides one-on-one support for your academic work. I have used the Writing Center myself. It is a great resource for support. I definitely recommend it if you are struggling with what to do or where to go on your paper. It is Absolutely a wonderful resource. You also have the Purdue Writing Guide. So the Purdue Writing Guide is a great resource for citations in multiple formats, which you have APA, you have Chicago style, you have MLA. Here at UNT, at least in graduate school, we use APA, but they also have MLA and Chicago style for anything your professors might request or desire. So I hope this was a helpful presentation. I hope that you learned something, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.